CIA-operated Predator drones are now conducting surveillance flights over Mexico, providing intelligence reports to Mexican authorities. Meanwhile, U.S. Special Forces just landed inside Mexico for joint training operations. The Mexican military is deploying 10,000 troops along key border cities. A ton is happening very quickly that marks a significant shift in the response against drug cartels. I've consolidated all the information you need to know about the steps being taken, the effects they're having, and the response from the cartel. The New York Times dropped a huge report in mid-February that revealed a bombshell of a story. The CIA revealed that they just expanded drone flights over Mexican territory to monitor the now 6 cartel groups that were designated as foreign terrorist organizations. But unnamed CIA officials explained that the intelligence they gathered is sent straight to Mexican authorities. Their primary goal is to locate drug production facilities. The government is essentially creating a hit list here, and they're passing that information on to Mexican Marines. They said that these intelligence operations were ongoing under previous administrations, but have now been intensified. This drone operation had previously never been disclosed to us regular folk in the public. So while the drones primarily are your MQ-9 Reapers that are capable of carrying missile payloads, we know that these are currently being used exclusively for surveillance. I mean, at least that's what the CIA claims, and we know the CIA would never lie about something like that. The US government has also increased manned spy plane missions near the border from once a month to 18 times in just a 10-day period, and we're going to get into that more later. But it's not enough to just be creeping around with your multi-million-dollar eyes in the sky. Some US troops are now officially south of the border inside Mexico. But first, I have some info for anyone who's ever been involved or injured in an accident. I've driven in cities all over the country, and I've had my fair share of minor accidents. For millions, though, all over the country every year, accidents on the road and elsewhere can be life-changing events, affecting ability to work and sometimes even causing lasting or permanent harm. When these life-changing events occur, it's important to understand your options that may help you get back on your feet, and Morgan & Morgan has the expertise and national network to get you the best results possible if you become their client, and their services are completely free unless you win. Since they're America's largest injury law firm, they have the resources to absorb all the upfront costs. With 100 offices nationwide and over 1,000 local high-power attorneys. Just recently, they achieved some significant verdicts for their clients, like $12 million in Florida, 34 times the highest insurance offer, and $26 million in Philadelphia, which was 40 times the highest insurance offer. If you've been in an accident or injured in any way, your case could be worth millions, so you can head over to the link in the description and start a claim that may change your life. In mid-February, a team of 11 Green Berets deployed to a naval base inside Mexico. This was approved very publicly by the Mexican Senate Commission that signed off on allowing US troops to enter. It's like with vampires, you have to allow them to enter. Now, what's this Special Forces detachment up to? Their official by-the-book, publicly stated role is to train Mexican naval special forces in unconventional warfare, counter-cartel operations. But I think there is a side quest that they've been given. They're not just there to go to the shooting range and then go slam some Modelos together afterwards, although that does sound like a good time. I wish I was invited. No, this is a major intelligence sharing opportunity. This is how human intelligence is passed along, because you can't always share information on cartel operations comfortably through your chain of command, especially if your captain's a goober and you don't trust him. These training missions are a two-way road. They're also there to discuss ways to limit the flow of American weapons trafficked into Mexico. 250,000 weapons are smuggled from the US into Mexico annually, which means 70% of Mexico's weapons crimes are traced back to US weapons. A major change happened here as well, because after talks between the two leaders of the nations, for the first time, the US government will now work jointly with Mexico to help prevent the entry of these guns. Man, sometimes I feel like this is a codependent relationship we're looking at here. Mexico has the drugs, America's got the guns. It's a geopolitical match made in heaven. To me, this deployment of US Special Forces indicates there's some level of cooperation still ongoing between the two nations. Yes, it's true that these kind of joint training missions between US Special Forces and Mexican Special Forces are relatively routine, but what I think is different here is that the media has announced these very publicly, and there's been official Special Forces press releases. It looks like the CIA purposely chose to reveal this information about the drone flights instead of it being a leak. My personal assessment is that I think this whole article reads like we're not the target audience for this information. It reads to me like it's meant to be read by cartel leadership. The United States and Mexico appear to be applying some PR pressure. They want the cartel to know that they're watching. It's like the US is saying, we see you, we know where you sleep, and you really should change your dirty sheets. We're seeing the opening stages of some kind of media campaign designed to publicly show the cartel that moves are being made against them, because the cartel closely monitors this information space. So far, over 2,500 Mexican troops were sent by Mexico's president to hotspots on the border. A massive surge of Mexican National Guard soldiers were sent to 13 cities from Tijuana to Matamoros. Along the way, they've uncovered advanced tunnel networks used for smuggling weapons and drugs. They've spread out along some of the most violent border cities in what's being described as a show of force. It's a deterrent that has coincided with a 94% drop in migrant border crossings compared to last year. And in these increased media spotlight, we're introduced to new characters that we haven't really been familiar with in a while. Allow me to introduce you to the US military's Northern Command. It's an area of responsibility that, generally speaking, is the United States, Mexico, and Canada region. You probably never heard of this command in the past because they're not as sexy usually as the US CENTCOM, which deals with the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan combat area, or US PACCOM, the badasses with attitude, which deals with the Taiwan-China region. They're not even the handsome EU-COM that has been getting a lot of attention lately. For sure, NORTHCOM doesn't get as much love and attention as they deserve, but today that's starting to change. They made this press release in February, which I'm pretty sure is the first press release anyone's read in its entirety from NORTHCOM in a while. In it, they outlined that NORTHCOM has stood up Task Force 140, headquartered near the border. The job of these 140 intelligence personnel is to analyze the information collected by those surveillance flights and other intelligence sources. So allow me to put on my tinfoil hat for a moment, if you will. Sounds to me like the intelligence gathered by those spy planes and SF soldiers will go straight to here, which then creates an action plan.
You boys like Mexico? Yeah!
So I'd like you to meet General Gregory Gilliot. He's the man in charge of Northern Command, and a lot is revealed by looking at him. He said to the Senate last week that they're providing intelligence that gets after the cartel networks that drive the production and distribution of fentanyl and pushes it across the border, end quote. If you look at who's been in charge of NORTHCOM going all the way back to its creation in 2002, it's almost always an Air Force or a Navy general. Why is that? General Gilliot, for example, has a background as a senior air battle manager. He's got more than 1,300 hours flying in an RC-135 surveillance aircraft. So that's airborne ISR is what gets this dude up in the morning. Part of the reason for this is I think this is a region that is considered mainly about air surveillance, missiles, and covert operations. That's why you see so many Air Force and Navy generals in charge of this area throughout history. It's not likely going to involve a ground war. Meanwhile, CENTCOM is almost always throughout history, or when it was stood up in the 2000s, always an Army or Marine general with a deputy Air Force general, because CENTCOM traditionally involves land wars. This tells us a lot about the operational focus on the border, that there's going to be a lot of surgical air surveillance and potentially airstrikes. We can actually tell where some of these spy planes are by looking at the open source data from Flight 24 that shows the surveillance aircraft's path. These planes are equipped with powerful radar systems and cameras that basically zoom in to see your nostril hair from sky. Not sure why you'd want to do that, but you could. When you hear that these have signals intelligence sensors, what that means is they can intercept phone communications and eavesdrop on the cartel. If the cartel is the kind of cabrones to communicate using emojis, then we'll know about it. These flights come packed with 30 linguists on board, intelligence specialists, and even code breakers. The RC-135 is like an intelligence vacuum. It sucks up all communications in the region like a hungry hippo. But maybe due to legality, they've been careful to stay behind the 12 nautical miles from the Mexican coastline, basically sticking to designated international waters and keeping their transponders on, although there may be flights that didn't have their transponder on that we don't know about. What is most unusual about these flights is that the United States is now deploying the old-fashioned U-2 spy plane, which are now taking part in these missions. This is a blast from the past, from the 1950s Cold War era. It creeps on the cartel from 70,000 feet in the sky and has a long 12-hour loitering time, which allows it to stay on station. This is something that we've never seen before in this region. The upgraded U-2S version uses a new sensor called the Vader Pod that has a synthetic aperture radar and multispectral imaging cameras. And here's what I mean. Take a look at this side-by-side comparison. We can see how the chemical plumes from a hidden drug lab stand out in the multispectral image that the U-2 would see on the right compared to the purely visual image on the left. I know it might look like a red and blue blob of an image to us, but to the trained eye, it looks like a drug lab with a giant red bullseye on it. But unfortunately, over the decades, the cartel has gotten good at staying hidden from these kind of signals intelligence gathering by using crazy methods. To avoid authorities in the past and to stay off the grid while still using the grid, they built an entirely alternate grid. That's right, the drug cartels built their own cell phone networks, like some kind of bizarro Mint Mobile for sicarios. Their network runs across almost all of northern Mexico. This was first pioneered by the Los Zetas cartel, which themselves were founded by a group of former Mexican Special Forces soldiers who were themselves trained by US Special Forces. The Zetas built this network starting sometime around 2009 after a few of their kingpins had been captured using their cell data. The Taliban and insurgents in Iraq couldn't even whip something up like this alternative grid. Even the way they did this was brutal. Los Zetas kidnapped engineers and technicians from local phone companies and forced them to develop a parallel mobile phone network. It's called gun-to-the-head diplomacy. Then these cartels expanded the enterprise into a business all its own by installing their own parasite antennas on existing commercial cell towers and threatened the technicians that service the towers to look the other way and to not report the new hardware. These pirate Wi-Fi narco antennas are all over the place. All you gotta do is extort the local population and they force them to pay $50 a month, so this operation brings in $150K for them a month. This is why these high-tech spy planes from the United States are an important asset, because it's a new technology that Mexican authorities didn't have access to. It now allows them to spy on the cartel that is trying to hide off the grid. Trust me, the US government has been spying on me for 3 decades. They've gotten good at this shit. But how is the cartel responding to all of this, the increased efforts and the public moves? 2 rival narco gangs in northeastern Mexico, the Metros and the Scorpion Group, just agreed to pause their turf war with each other and to lay low. Cartel leadership has gone into hiding further inland from the border and Gulf Coast regions as a direct result of the surveillance overflights. These actions are forcing them to move, which in some cases is exactly what you want. But what effects have these steps had so far? We can guesstimate, because a human smuggler who charges people between 18 and 40K to enter the United States, depending if they're from Latin America or Asia, they said in an interview to NBC that his business had plummeted by 80% since January. His business, his human smuggling business. But when I hear about all these developments, I have a ton of questions. The first thing that I think a lot of people are curious about, it raises questions about the extent of cooperation between US and Mexican authorities. The coordination of these surveillance flights with Mexican government remains a subject of debate in the open source intelligence community. However, there are some clues, I think. Mexico's Defense Secretary Sandoval said, quote, "We cannot rule espionage out because we don't know what they're doing," end quote. His comments suggest that not all aspects of the surveillance program has been fully disclosed to Mexican authorities. Meanwhile, official statements from the Mexican government say that there has been no violation of Mexican airspace, adding to the ambiguity surrounding the operation that may be intentional. When Mexico's president spoke about this, she said that she was aware that it's part of a little campaign. These statements could indicate some level of strategic ambiguity, meaning both sides want the cartel to know that they're after them, but to not know to what degree these are a coordinated effort, because that information could be classified. It's like my old squad leader used to always say, shake the tree twice to get honey, but be careful of the bees.